didn't already believe, start believing now as Max Verstappen roars into title contention after claiming sprint victory and pole position at the United States Grand Prix as the McLaren duo crash out in the sprint. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. And Ian, we have so much to discuss from the sprint race and qualifying. But first of all, I've got to remind our viewers that at Racing News 365, we are running a very special prize giveaway. If you'd like to win a special edition Racing Bull shirt signed by Isack, Hadjar and LAWSON, all you've got to do to be in the chance of winning is be subscribed to this channel, racingnews365.com, to be in with a chance. Best of luck. Now, Ian, so much to discuss. Where do we begin, I wonder? We've got to begin, of course, with the sprint race. We'll talk about qualifying in a couple of moments because something pretty major happened in the sprint at the first corner within the first few seconds for the second Grand Prix in a row. I know it's not Grand Prix race, but anyways, for the second Grand Prix in a row, we have the McLarens making contact. This time, Oscar Piastri into Lando Norris at turn one, and in the end, both drivers retiring instantly from the sprint. The big result with Max Verstappen winning, that gap is down to 55. Game on.
I mean, let's face it, mate, what happened in Singapore just pales into insignificance compared to what we saw at turn one in this sprint today. That is just astonishing, it has to be said. The McLaren mantra has always been, don't crash into one of the guys. Well, that was a crash and then some. Just remarkable turn of events and what this has now done for the championship, in particular coming out of qualifying as well, with Max on pole again, Lando alongside him on the front row, and Oscar really struggling for pace in sixth position on the grid. But that turn one incident, yes, that was just something else, and that really has added another dynamic twist to this championship battle. There will be a McLaren review. Initially, the reaction from both Zak Brown and Andrea Stella was pointing an accusing finger at Nico Hülkenberg. Zak Brown later rode back on that, having had a look at the incident again post-sprint, because just to give people a quick précis, off the grid, Max made a great start. Oscar from third on the grid, Lando second. Oscar got a good run up the hill, going around the outside, but Lando with the inside line, had that better line going into that sharp turn one left-hander. And as Lando came through it, Oscar tried to switch back underneath Lando in switching back. There was plenty of room on the inside. There's Nico Hülkenberg coming through. There's Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso coming through as well. Nico had nowhere to go. Oscar then just collided into Nico. Oscar then hit Lando, spun Lando around, and that was both McLarens out of the game, as well as Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso. So, yes, as you say, this is just throwing things on its head because Max went on to take what was, in the end, a relatively comfortable sprint victory. He was challenged by Mercedes George Russell at one stage on lap 8 after we've had 5 laps behind the safety car. Managed to fend that off. George is going in too deep into turn 12, the back straight here at the Circuit of the Americas. Max come out of it unscathed. Nearly had another incident between the two. It was that close with Max being pushed wide off the track. But in the end, as I say, comfortable victory for Max Verstappen. And as you pointed out, that big now 55 points. And I'll let you do the math because I know you've worked it out as to if the 3 drivers finished in their current positions on the grid, what that would do for the championship battle.
Yes, of course. So Max Verstappen went on to claim pole in qualifying with Lando in second and Oscar Piastri in sixth. If they somehow finish where they're starting from, which I do think is very unlikely, it's worth pointing out. But if it happens, Max will be 38 points behind Oscar, whilst Lando will be just 12 behind his teammate. Worth pointing out that obviously for that turn one incident, no action was taken, very quickly judged as a racing incident, which I think is fair play. Forget the saying 3 into 1 doesn't go. In this occasion, it was 4 into 1 doesn't go. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see something similar perhaps on Sunday for the Grand Prix, because the turn 1 corner at COTA just offers the opportunity for something like that to happen. Actually, the sprint itself So much of it was spent behind the safety car following that turn 1 collision on the opening lap, and also another turn 1 collision towards the end between Lance Stroll and Esteban Ocon. Lance received a 5-place grid penalty as well as 2 penalty points. He quickly apologised as well for that, and that was the sprint, Ian. Moving on to qualifying, and who claimed pole? We've said it already, Max Verstappen. It is turning into the perfect weekend. He is certainly loving this situation, and you can just feel the confidence. The momentum is just going more and more into his favour. He's the favourite for Sunday, it's got to be said.
The key for Max Verstappen on Sunday is going to be was race pace, because after the sprint, he was not happy with the race pace of his car, and he pointed out that if both McLarens had been in the game, then he felt it would have been more than likely both McLarens would have overtaken him at some point during that sprint race, because he was just not happy, in particular with how the back end of the car was feeling. Changes were made to that car, the RB21, during part were made post-sprint. Naturally, obviously, we've seen the 1 lap pace at that Red Bull landed Max sprint qualifying pole position, and of course Grand Prix qualifying pole position. The key, as I say, is going to be now have those changes done enough to make Max feel comfortable to go on and claim Grand Prix victory as well. A victory, you feel, is on the cards, because McLaren during qualifying, in particular Oscar, just not really happy with how the car was handling. Obviously, changes had to be made to the McLarens, given the accident damage to both of those McLaren 39s. Neither Lando nor Oscar looked particularly comfortable at any stage during qualifying. It's now going to be about how's the handling, the balance of that car going into the Grand Prix, given the repairs that have had to be undertaken on both of them.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that with the 2 McLarens crashing out in the sprint, it resulted in a pretty random top 8 picking up points in the sprint. Verstappen claimed sprint victory, with Russell in second, Carlos Sainz for Williams in third, Lewis Hamilton fourth, Charles Leclerc fifth, Alex Albon sixth, Yuki Tsunoda from 18th to 7th, and Kimi Antonelli picking up a point in 8th. And going back to qualifying, Ian, in terms of McLaren, obviously Max claimed pole for 1 minute 32.510, but that was almost 3 tenths clear of Lando. Oscar was in a couple more attempts at drift. He's been comfortably slower than Lando throughout this weekend so far, and this does seem for the first time for several rounds there is a genuine pace difference between the 2 McLaren drivers.
We've seen it coming, haven't we? It's been kind of there or thereabouts. Lando has been nipping away at the heels of Oscar for quite some time, chipping away at that lead little bit by little bit. And now this weekend, again, you feel there's a little bit of a different momentum shift between the two. With Oscar, a lot of fingers pointed at Oscar post-sprint in terms of he was the cause of the accident. If you look at any kind of onboard, if you look at, in particular, the analysis of the incident itself, the feeling was that in doing that switchback on Lando, the steering was too aggressive. It also had to brake more than necessary compared to those around him that had got the greater momentum going into that corner. So as I say, fingers being pointed at Oscar for that incident. And bearing in mind that the third major crash in 3 Grand Prix now, if you think of the 2 that he had over the course of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend, plus that incident as well in Singapore with Lando, where he felt he didn't get the rub of the green on that occasion, that felt McLaren could have sided with him and that Lando should have given the place back, and then was had all the discussion about repercussions against Lando, what that would entail. Well, are things now going to balance themselves out after this particular incident? If McLaren do find that Oscar was the guilty party on this occasion, so how's his mindset going into this race? He's on the grid. He's got to try and make his way through. If he sees championship lead being whittled away by both Lando and in particular Max Verstappen, and you can feel a little bit of that pressure, not a little bit, but considerably, that pressure is now starting to potentially bear down upon him. He's been championship leader for such a long time. I think it was the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix where he started to take the championship lead and has led the championship ever since. So bearing in mind, we are getting to the real business end of the season. It's going to be a lot of questions now being asked of Oscar about his mindset. He's never been in this kind of championship battle before in Formula One. Yes, of course, he's done it in the lower categories and he has been truly successful. in those lower categories. But this is Formula One. This is different. This is all eyes on him. A lot of questions being asked about him. There's going to have to dig deep to come out of this weekend in particular, and hope they can limit the damage to both Max and Lando, who, as we know, are starting on the front row of the grid on Sunday.
As we said about Lando in Singapore, Oscar on Sunday needs to get his elbows out from 6th on the grid. That's going to be his only opportunity to score some big points. And if we forget about the sprint race for a second and just look at qualifying and forget about the Turn 1 crash, and one of the biggest surprises of the day has been Ferrari coming alive. This has been one of their best Saturdays for a long time, picking up 4th and 5th in the sprint, 3rd and 5th on the grid in qualifying, Leclerc 3rd, Lewis Hamilton in 5th. After a disastrous Friday, they seem to have found something overnight.
Yes, they have. Lewis confirmed that in the pen afterwards that changes were made to both cars of himself and Charles Leclerc. Yes, of course, they benefited from the incident at Turn 1 because of the 3 cars that were ahead of them, Lando, Oscar, and Nico. In particular for Lando and Oscar, they went out the race, while Nico, of course, involved heavily in that incident. He was pitched towards the back of the pack. So, yes, they took advantage of that. But overall, you saw in qualifying that the pace was considerably different in that particular qualifying session compared to the sprint qualifying session on Friday evening, where they just really struggled both on the medium tyres through SQ1 and SQ2, and again with the soft tyres in SQ3. But Lewis, I asked him particularly whether he felt that this was it. This was his golden opportunity now to finally get that elusive Grand Prix podium for Ferrari. Of course, if he doesn't do it this weekend, as we discussed, Nick, he'll take over that record in Didier Pironi. It's been long held for many, many years. It's an unwanted record that Lewis will, as I say, will want to try and get off his back. He does face the difficulty, of course. The main thing that he turned around and talked about was trying to get ahead of George Russell early on. He feels that he's got the legs on his teammate Charles Leclerc. We certainly saw that during the sprint where he managed to get an overtake on Charles, did that really well to get that extra position. But for Lewis now, his old teammate at Mercedes, he feels is going to be his major rival, the one he has to tackle first before then targeting that potential podium, that long overdue podium for Ferrari. We know he's been in the top 3 in the sprint. That was all the way back at the 2nd Grand Prix with end of the season in China. But that Grand Prix podium has eluded him so far. Can he finally get to it?
Let's quickly go through the top 10 on the grid at the Circuit of the Americas. And it is Max Verstappen on pole with Norris in 2nd, Leclerc 3rd, George Russell 4th, Hamilton 5th, Oscar Piastri in 6th, Antonelli 7th, Oliver Bearman in 8th, Carlos Sainz 9th, and Fernando Alonso in P10. Very finally in, a driver not in that top 10, who normally is, to give him credit, is Isack Hadjar. Had a nasty crash in the opening minutes of Q1 at turn 6, resulting in a red flag. We know that Isack, wears his heart on his sleeve. And we saw that after his crash, punching himself on the helmet in his cockpit. Must have some sore knuckles, you'd imagine, after that, because that cannot be nice. And in the pen, I would imagine, emotions still very much on display.
Quite obviously. It took him a little while to come to the pen. And that you can forgive him, of course, because he would have wanted to calm himself down, have a talk with people around him, make sure he was in the right mindset, of course, to answer the questions, the obvious questions that were going to be put to him about that incident. Naturally, it was his mistake. He just wasn't at one with the car at that particular portion so early on in qualifying. And that led, as I say, to this major mistake. Yes, he started punching himself around at the helmet, you've mentioned it. And after that, he had calmed down. He is a different driver compared to the incident in Australia, of course, that really hurt him in that first Grand Prix of the season where he crashed on the formation that in wet conditions. He was beside himself then. Who can forget the consoling arm of Lewis Hamilton's father, Anthony, as they walked together down the paddock at Melbourne's Albert Park. On this occasion, Isack has matured. He is a different driver now compared to then, but he knows this was a major mistake on his part, one that he's got a lot of catching up to do in the Grand Prix itself. It's going to be very difficult to mesh his way into the points from the back of the grid. He's actually going to start 19th, of course, because Lance Stroll, after wiping out, we've got to mention that as well, Nick, wiping out the Haas of Esteban Ocon during the sprint race. He gets a 5-place grid penalty, so he will be at the back. And for Isack, he will be 19th on the grid. As I say, that's still going to be a difficult ask to find rescue points from that position. But this is one of those Grand Prix that lends itself to numerous incidents, as we've already seen plenty this weekend. I would be very surprised if there aren't more coming our way on Sunday in the Grand Prix itself.
Only time will tell. And on that note, Ian, amazing stuff as always. For those who've been watching this F1 update, please be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, not only to be in with a chance of winning that Racing Bull shirt, but also if you enjoy our content. And please do comment below your thoughts on anything that happened across the sprint race and qualifying, what you think is going to happen in the race on Sunday. Be sure to join Ian and I after the race on Sunday as we dissect all the action. See you later.
As always, hopes for watching and listening, and do subscribe because you could be in with a chance of winning that wonderful shirt. Thank you again.